What would you do if the last thing your sister saw before passing away was something so terrifying that her eyes refused to close? Tonight, we dive into a disturbing piece of Japanese folklore that will make you question whether some memories are better left buried. This is the story of Yuki, a girl who discovered that keeping pieces of the dead close to your heart might not always be a blessing. In the quiet mountain village of Shirakawa, where morning mist clings to ancient cedars like ghostly fingers, 17-year-old Yuki Tanaka lived with a secret that made her jacket pocket feel heavier than her grief. 3 months had passed since her twin sister Mei's sudden passing, but Yuki couldn't let go of what the doctors had left behind. The funeral director had mentioned it casually, almost as an afterthought. Your sister's eyes, they wouldn't close naturally. We had to remove them for the ceremony. Most families would have been disturbed by such details, but Yuki felt something else entirely, a desperate need to preserve what Mei had seen in her final moments. That night, she snuck into the funeral home's preparation room. The small glass vials containing Mei's eyes sat on a metal tray, preserved in clear solution. They looked so alive, so aware, that Yuki could swear they tracked her movement as she approached. The eyes that had shared every secret, every laugh, every tear with her for 17 years. She took them. Now, every morning, Yuki would slip her hand into her jacket pocket and feel the small, cold vials against her palm. The sensation brought her comfort at first, like Mei was still watching over her, still protecting her, as she had in life. But lately, something had changed. The eyes had begun to feel warm against her skin, and sometimes when she held them close, she could hear whispers that sounded remarkably like her sister's voice. "Yuki," the voice would say, barely audible above the mountain wind. "I saw something terrible before I left. Something that's still watching us." The villagers noticed changes in Yuki too. Her mother mentioned how she'd started talking to herself, having conversations with someone who wasn't there. Her friends at school whispered about how she'd begun wearing sunglasses indoors, claiming the light hurt her eyes. But none of them knew about the growing compulsion she felt to look through those preserved eyes to see what Mei had seen in her final moments. Late at night, when the village slept under its blanket of mountain silence, Yuki would take out the vials and hold them up to the moonlight. The eyes inside seemed to pulse with their own rhythm, and sometimes, just sometimes, she could see reflections that didn't match her surroundings, shadows that moved wrong, shapes that shouldn't exist. The whispers were getting stronger. The breakthrough came on a night when the mountain fog was so thick that Yuki couldn't see her own reflection in her bedroom window. She had been holding Mei's eyes for hours, feeling their warmth spread up her arms like a fever, when suddenly the whispers became clear. "Look through me, sister. See what I saw." Against every instinct screaming in her mind, Yuki pressed one of the vials against her own eye. The world exploded into impossible colors and shapes that her living vision couldn't process. But through Mei's preserved sight, she saw the truth of her sister's final moments. Mei hadn't passed away from the illness the doctors claimed. She had been standing in their shared bedroom, looking out at the mountain forest, when something had looked back. Not an animal or a person, but something that existed in the spaces between shadows, something that fed on the sight of living things. The entity had locked eyes with Mei through the window, and in that instant of contact, it had begun to drain her life force through her vision. Mei had tried to close her eyes, to break the connection, but it was too late. The thing had already begun its feast, and her eyes had remained open, frozen in terror as her life ebbed away. But the most horrifying revelation wasn't how Mei had been taken. It was that the entity was still there, still watching, still hungry. And now it knew that Yuki could see it. Through Mei's preserved eyes, Yuki watched as the shadow thing pressed itself against her bedroom window, its form rippling like oil on water. It had no face, no definite shape, but she could feel its attention like ice in her veins. It had been waiting, patient as stone, for someone else to look through those cursed eyes. It feeds on sight. May's voice whispered urgently in her mind. Every time you look through my eyes, you give it more power. You have to stop, Yuki. You have to destroy them before it takes you too. But Yuki found herself unable to look away. The entity's presence was hypnotic, terrible and beautiful in its alien wrongness. She understood now why May's eyes had refused to close. They had been claimed, possessed by something that existed beyond human understanding. The vials in her hands were growing hot, almost burning, and she realized with dawning horror that her own eyes were beginning to feel the same paralysis that had claimed her sister. The entity was patient, but it was also persistent. It had waited 3 months for this moment, and now it was ready to complete what it had started. As the shadow pressed closer to the glass, Yuki felt her eyelids growing heavy with an unnatural weight. The last thing she managed to whisper before the paralysis took hold was her sister's name, spoken like a prayer into the mountain darkness. When Yuki's mother found her the next morning, she was sitting by the window with her eyes wide open, staring at something in the forest that no one else could see. The glass vials lay shattered on the floor, their contents long evaporated, but it was too late. The connection had been made, the feeding had begun. The doctors called it a rare neurological condition, the same mysterious illness that had claimed May months earlier. They spoke of genetic predispositions and unfortunate coincidences, but Yuki's mother knew better. She had heard the whispers too, in the dark hours before dawn, voices calling from the mountain forest. In the weeks that followed, other villagers began to report strange sightings. Glimpses of 2 young women standing at the forest's edge, their eyes wide and unblinking, beckoning others to come closer and look. Children would wake screaming from dreams of being watched through their windows. Pets refused to go outside after dark. The village elder, wise in the old ways, finally spoke the truth that everyone had been afraid to voice. Some hungers can never be satisfied, only passed along. The entity that fed on sight had gained 2 new servants, 2 new sets of eyes through which to hunt. Yuki's mother, desperate to end the cycle, gathered what remained of her daughter's belongings and burned them in the village square. But even as the flames consumed their photographs and letters, she couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the mountain darkness, 4 eyes were watching, waiting, remembering. The local newspaper reported the incident as a tragic case of familial illness, but the survivors knew the truth. They boarded up windows facing the forest, avoided eye contact with strangers, and taught their children never to look too long at anything that seemed to be looking back. Because in the mountains of Shirakawa, where mist clings to ancient trees, like ghostly fingers, some sights are never meant to be seen, and some eyes, once opened to the darkness between worlds, can never truly close again. The whispers continue on windless nights, calling new victims to press their faces against cold glass and discover what lies beyond the veil of human perception. And somewhere in that space between shadow and sight, 2 sisters wait with eyes that refuse to close, ready to share their terrible gift with anyone brave enough or foolish enough to look. If this tale has left its mark on your mind, if you found yourself checking the shadows while listening, then share it with those brave enough to peer into the darkness alongside you. Subscribe for more journeys into the terrifying corners of human experience, and remember, in a world full of things that watch from the shadows, sometimes the scariest part isn't what you see, it's what sees you back. What would you do if you found something your loved one left behind that seemed to still hold a piece of their soul? Share your thoughts below, but be careful what you wish to see. Some sights can never be unseen.